Good evening, Noble Promise here. We are here. Let's read a few more paragraphs in this book in rough draft stage. My Ancestor Speaks, the life, death, and spirit of Emmett Till. As you see, there is a slide set up putting this into perspective today. This slide likened to one not as designed with such artistry in the days of 1955 when Emmett Till was a boy growing up in Chicago, sliding. But if Emmett Till were alive now, he would be 80 years old, July 25th, and that slide setup could very well be one at this moment he and his family would be viewing, with grandchildren sliding down and his children along with them watching his offsprings have such a jolly time. But all of that was dashed. August 28th, the body of Emmett Till was found in the Tallahatchie River after being abducted. Let's read about Till's life here in My Ancestor Speaks. Till's life, as now directed and controlled by complete strangers with bad intentions, was edging towards a path of dire straits. Were they even certain that they would eventually be on the inside of a country-born hideout? Were they even certain that they, the killers, would eventually be inside a country-born hideout? They drove for several miles as an aside, and they couldn't find this special hideout that they wanted to, I use the word special loosely, where they wanted to take Till and scare him, but they couldn't find it, so they wound up at this barn. Their seemingly aimless traveling through the delta, racing against the pre-dawn sun and the sounds of roosters' alarm. That's what they did. For Till, the thoughts of possibilities about his fate must have conjured up endless possibilities. By now, none imagined could be comforting or pleasant. The American Negroes had long since existed as the most convenient and practical object to wage war against by the Anglo-Saxons. The Negro was generally in a position of compromise by economic instability to an America unwilling to extend equal rights and privilege to meet basic needs. They were most often forced into subservient social caste positions, and in rural counties like Money, Mississippi, they were the subjects to the whims of legalized systemic oppression on steroids. Mississippians exercised with vigor and zeal, seemingly also with the pleasure arrived at from quenching a thirst of oppressing those who were of lesser means. The tones of intolerance towards people of non-European descent were essentials of the Southern life traditions, laws, and established social disgraces. These norms, and the most traumatizing upon a people, had forever formed the basis for all that was and would be for many, for decades here and thereafter. Next paragraph, as we read My Ancestor Speaks, rough draft. Conversely, there are human forces set within us that look upon the self and refuses to allow it to bow or bend in a certain direction when pressured. It draws the line for which the measure of self is stored without allowance to be tampered with or flawed. Some may think of it as the superego. It can become the self you are willing to die for. At some point, you take a stance in the face of danger. Maybe danger upon yourself, maybe danger directed at someone else. It can be one you have weighed all options, and the only one you can see without question or doubt, this ego, is the life you see for yourself, or death coming. Instead, some faced life or death choices, many in the face of organized mobs. There remained men or women refusing to relinquish in the face of impending horror the only self they knew to be, quote unquote, themselves. There are also causes that form new layers of steadfastness regardless of the circumstances to the contrary, which may be threatening. In 1955 Mississippi, the expectation was that the Negro had lessons to be taught for compliance to the standards of Jim Crow, and wishes from imbalanced minds heeded. Jim Crow was a demented, soulless being. Thanks to people down in Mississippi like Fannie Lou Hamer and Medgar Evers, who worked and struggled tirelessly to improve conditions for the Negro. Their works in the realms of grassroots movements and U.S. politics did help a lot, raising the consciousness and mentality of the masses who worked and lived to maintain semblances of normalcy amid the confounding aura of a mad, mad world. Next paragraph. Fannie Lou Hamer, a woman who elevated to positions of U.S. political candidacy. Fannie Lou Hamer, a woman who elevated to positions of U.S. political candidacy. Who elevated to positions of U.S. political candidacy and Democratic delegate during the 1964 Democratic Convention, had roots living and working as a Mississippi sharecropper. That had implanted in her true, deep convictions to help others. Her background molded her to help the less fortunate. She became an icon with her famous transition effect. Fannie Lou Hamer became an icon in her famous quote, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." She became an icon and made famous her saying, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." That's an edit on the spot. That's an audible edit. Those words were from a woman who, because of her seeking to progress beyond the shackles of a pseudo-slavery sharecropping existence, tarried on to a position of outstanding citizenship, valor, and bravery. The poor of Mississippi grew to appreciate Fannie Lou Hamer as a Pied Piper for human rights, including voter rights in Mississippi. She took on the role as though a prescription had been written for her. Such a prescription would appear to have been written: take care of all business pertaining to inequality on a daily basis. Rest only enough to sustain life and continue fighting for your people tirelessly. Take administered beatings by Mississippi law enforcement and other forms of abuse by the land's citizenry. This has been a very impactful grouping of paragraphs fundamental to the backdrop to be painted, the backdrop in which Emmett Till landed. I mentioned earlier in paragraphs, people had been killed the same year before Emmett Till arrived to the Delta. These people were killed for standing up for their rights, trying to get others to vote, and the like, because as we've read before, something as simple as not getting off the path being walked by Anglo-Saxons could be a prescription for much harm and demise even. The next paragraph is rather lengthy. Lengthy paragraphs are good. We're going to read just a taste. It has to do with one of my heroes, my main man. I actually hugged his statue in Jackson, Mississippi decades ago while visiting downtown